TCL is a proud sponsor of the 1500 ESPN studios. TCL, America's fastest growing TV brand. Minnesota Vikings, the NFL, football, yeah, football. Welcome to Purple Podcast.
Welcome to another episode of the Purple Podcast. Matthew Coller here, and to make another appearance for a big matchup between the offensive line and the defensive line, Brandon Thorn writes for USA Football, among other things. Brandon, how are you?
I'm doing good, Matt. Happy to be here again.
Yes, and we are happy to have you, except for, Brandon, I'm not certain that everyone is going to love what they hear about the Vikings offensive line, because last week against the Rams, they were completely dominated, and I saw a stat today that they are on pace, which I know, early season pace stats, but on pace to give up more pressures than anyone ever has in the Pro Football Focus era. That came from Sam Monson tweeted that this morning. So that's not great, but I'm curious, Brandon, let's just start here. If you think that there is a fix after watching the Vikings offensive line and how much they struggled against the Rams, most people do, but not that much, where Kirk Cousins was throwing with pressure on almost every other throw. Is there something that they can do personnel-wise? Should Mike Remmers be a tackle? Should Danny Isidora be in the game? Should Brett Jones be in the game? I mean, is there anything that they can do to get a hold of this issue?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't really see, what I would call a fix by any means this year. I mean, there's just not a lot to work with, on the roster right now in terms of offensive line. We've talked about guys like Isidora, but, with performances that, he showed a little bit in the preseason, it's tough to, go with somebody like that. But I mean, at this point, I don't know. I mean, you might as well see what you have, I think, because we know Tom Compton is, not really a starter in the league. He's starting for you guys right now, but he's clearly a, backup caliber guy. Remmers is a, below average guard, maybe an average right tackle, but, you can't really put him out there right now because you don't have anybody at guard. But, if you wanted to try Isidora, over there, that's maybe an option. But, with Elflein back, I think that, things might stabilize a little bit and, you guys could, maybe potentially, grow into even a below average offensive line would be nice, at this point. Maybe an average offensive line eventually, but that's kind of the ceiling that I see with this unit this year is, average somewhere, around, I don't know, the top 20, maybe in that 20 range, of offensive lines is the ceiling, but it's going to be tough to get there right now, man. It's not looking good. I don't have a whole lot of, positive things to say right now.
So can you explain, because I got a tweet on this morning, about how Nick Easton's injury really hurt them? Because, I mean, I think we knew coming in that Tom Compton was not a guy who had started a whole lot of games in the NFL, and that there was a reason for that, because if you're good on the offensive line, you're going to be in there. But it seems to me that it's not just on him getting overpowered by Aaron Donald in pass protection, because that would happen sometimes to Easton, but they can't run the ball at all, and the screen game out of the backfield has been pretty limited too.
Yeah, Easton was a guy that, we had talked about quite a bit, and I I liked him last year. I liked what he could do, in terms of athletically. His play speed was really good, climbing to the second level, getting out in space, hooking and reaching guys in the zone run game. Those type of things I thought were good for sure. So I really liked him as kind of a developmental guy, but also as, kind of a solid starter as well, guard last year, somebody young enough to, grow with on that offensive line and alongside Elflein. So him getting hurt, definitely limits what you're able to do, especially in the run game. But, and plus I really liked his competitive toughness as well. I thought he played, very similarly to, Pat Elflein in terms of, their aggressiveness, physicality. even though he wasn't the strongest guy. So, you know, I think you're missing a lot there at the guard spot, and replacing him with Compton. I mean, it's night and day, especially not just in, you know, their performance, but, you know, what they're able to do. And, Compton's just, you know, kind of one of those guys who, you know, like you said, is a backup who doesn't really do anything, you know, above, you know, a below average type of rate, you know, whereas, you know, with Easton, you had a guy who could do several things, you know, above average. So, yeah, that was a huge loss, you know, especially with not drafting the guard. So, you know, I know that, you know, clearly they were counting on Easton to be a guy that they were, you know, going to depend on, and somebody who was going to get better, you know, throughout the year. So, yeah, once that happened, you know, and having to put Tom Compton in there, you know, you knew things, you know, had a low ceiling, you know, from the get-go, and we're seeing it.
Something interesting, I asked Linval Joseph about playing in practice against Nick Easton, and he talked about exactly what you said, that competitive toughness. He compared him to a gnat because, you know, he's not that big, yeah. Especially it is funny for an offensive lineman to be called a gnat, but compared to Linval Joseph, everyone is small. But just, he said that, you know, Easton was really...
That's a good comparison.
Yeah, right. I mean, if you saw them standing next to each other, it's amazing that Easton can handle some of those guys because he's not huge, but he said that Easton was extremely clever too, and he would never do the same thing twice during, you know, a practice or them going one-on-one with each other. And that's some huge praise from Linval Joseph. So I think there was a lot of respect for him, and with him out, they're forced to scramble and they go get Brett Jones, but he doesn't play very well. He was mostly dominated when he was in there. And now they're just sort of left with what they have. But as far as options go, you touched on the potential of Remmers to right tackle, and I think that's gaining some steam within Vikings Twitter of people asking me, hey, are they going to kick him back out to right tackle? Can you just compare him from what you saw at right tackle to him playing guard? Because I think, just real quick, I think it's been a little unfair, the analysis of him at guard, because he's just drawn a murderer's row of defensive tackles that he's gone against in his 5 games at guard. He's gone against Akeem Hicks, who is tough. He gets Aaron Donald and then Ndamukong Suh in the last game. DeForest Buckner goes against the Vikings interior. I mean, Kenny Clark and Mike Daniels. It's just like going up against some of the best pitchers in baseball and then having a low batting average, right? So just give me your kind of thoughts on him at those two positions.
Yeah, so Remmers is a guy who played right tackle pretty much his whole career in Carolina and, you know, initially in Minnesota. And that's why he was signed in Minnesota. So him having to go inside to guard, you know, you're asking a guy who is, you know, just solid at right tackle to go into a new position that he's never played before. I mean, you can't expect, you know, in my mind, logically for him to match his play, you know, especially against the competition he's going against. So naturally, one step below solid is below average. So that's what he's been at times. But when you're going against elite players, below average versus elite, you're going to look pretty bad. Mm-hmm. And, you know, maybe worse than you are. So yeah, he really struggles, you know, inside in pass protection, especially. And we touched on this, you know, in that one of the video podcasts that we did, earlier in the year. But, you know, in terms of getting a set on guys and playing with that inside out relationship, he just really struggles to get to that point. And he's constantly playing from behind against guys, you know, just not really in that relationship with defenders very often at all. And that causes him to lunge and, you know, just never really look comfortable against guys who can rush the passer on the inside. He just hasn't really acclimated to it to the point where he can match these elite guys. And I don't ever expect him to, you know, and I don't, you know, I mean, I can't imagine that the Vikings expected him to, you know, do a whole lot better than he's doing right now. I mean, you know, against the competition he's facing. So, you know, the good news is after, you know, Philly, you know, they're going to go on like a 4-game stretch where he's not really going to see any great interior defensive linemen again, you know, minus Leonard Williams with the Jets, but Cardinals, Saints, Lions, that's going to be a huge break considering, if you compare, Arizona, New Orleans, Detroit to Philadelphia, Los Angeles, Green Bay, so, definitely, an opportunity there. I think, 3 of the next 4 games to get some confidence together, if they are going to keep him at guard. And just for the unit in general, just to gain some confidence, because I don't really think these defensive lines, there's some good players, don't get me wrong, Sheldon Rankins is somebody who comes up, but just not what they've been through, in these first 5 weeks. So that is something that I think you can look at, over the course of the next month as an encouraging sign for the unit. Cause I think, if you're going to get it together, this would be the time, heading into the bye week. It would be excellent to do that.
So what is your analysis of the small sample size of Brian O'Neill? He was able to get in a couple games, but for not whole games and not a lot of different situations. Both were very much where the Vikings are throwing on every single down. In one case, they're down a bunch of points to Buffalo when he ultimately gets in the game. But, Rashad Hill, I think, has been exactly who Rashad Hill is, that he's been all right at times in pass protection. He's gotten smoked in pass protection. He's not very good at all in run blocking, and this team is the worst running team in the NFL, which I don't think any of us saw coming with Dalvin Cook returning, but when you look at who they faced and how the offensive line is constructed, it does make a lot of sense. Do you think that we will see more of Brian O'Neill as we go forward here?
Lucky's 13 Pubs has you covered for the best game day experience this football season. Tons of TVs, legendary appetizers, amazing fresh half-pound burgers, handcrafted sandwiches, and a wide variety of other pub favorites. The drink menu is awesome too. Huge selection of tap beer, handcrafted cocktails, and the best Bloody Marys in town. Seriously, these Bloodies are awesome. Try the Bacon Bloody, the Jalapeno Bloody, the Mother Mary, or just get a flight and try them all. Plus, Lucky's 13 celebrates Sunday Fun Day. Happy hour all day long on Sunday, every Sunday. Events and prize giveaways during games, too. Lucky's 13 has locations in Bloomington, Burnsville, Mendota, Plymouth, and Roseville. Having people over for the game? Call ahead to Lucky's and order some of those legendary apps, and they'll be ready to bring home when you get there. It's football time at Lucky's 13 Pubs. Find them online at luckys13pub.com. luckys13pub.com. It's the most wonderful time of the year, football time. And Lucky's 13 Pubs has you covered for the best game day experience. luckys13pub.com.
I don't see what you guys, really have to lose at this point, because I think his confidence is just going to be fine. I mean, we'll see how he responds to that Buffalo game if he gets back in. But, the first, the 2 games that he's appeared in this year, I've seen every snap, and I think it's been okay. Like I said from that first game, I think the best thing to me is the mental processing piece, seeing things. Being able to process line games and stunts. That was very encouraging. And you could see the athleticism a lot of the time in his pass set. But his hand placement is sporadic right now. He gets too wide at times, like he lets guys get into his chest. His pad level is too high, some of the time. But I wouldn't even say pad level is my biggest concern. I'd say hand usage is probably my second biggest. And the biggest thing is really his ability to anchor and, the play strength piece. We saw it against Buffalo. I mean, he got blown up in that game. I mean, 5 or 6 times he's lifted off his feet. I think he got put on his back or on his butt, 3 or 4 times. So, his anchor is a major problem. And, it's not like the Bills have anybody who's, you're going to worry about in terms of, speed to power. So, like this weekend, going against somebody like Brandon Graham, that might be a disaster. So, I would definitely wait on, putting him in here for the next couple of weeks, but, or at least this week. But, I think the anchoring and the play strength and the hand placement as a pass protector are the biggest issues. And then in the run game, like you mentioned, we haven't really seen him run block much, but, it hasn't been great. It's not like he's, he's not the type of guy who's going to really generate much movement. He's, just kind of a guy who gets on guys and tries to steer them. And that's, kind of what we've seen. But the hand usage, I think, would translate to the run game in terms of being worrisome, and for his placement, because you have to try to get on the inside of the frame of guys, and he struggles to do that, a lot of the time. So yeah, I mean, he can offer you, things, in the screen game, climbing to the second level, getting out in space that Hill just can't do. But at this point, with this line, he's not going to move the needle one way or the other very much, in my opinion. So, you might as well just keep him on the bench until you see a matchup you like.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And when I did go back and look at what he did against Buffalo, it was not good. And it was kind of disturbing to see him just let guys get into his chest and drive him back. Like that's not going to be very successful if that happens against better pass rushers. And speaking of that, Philadelphia defensive line, clearly a 4-3 as opposed to a 3-4, looks to me like it's even more dangerous than the Rams. As good as the Rams were with Aaron Donald, who might be the best player in the whole NFL aside from quarterbacks, and Ndamukong Suh, but now it's guys just as powerful inside and incredible outside rushers. I don't have any idea how this Vikings offensive line is going to handle the Eagles.
Yeah, so, I guess we could just start, I think with the fact that the Vikings are the 32nd, team in the NFL in rushing offense, and the Philadelphia Eagles are the number one run defense. So that right there.
Is that bad? Is that bad, Brandon?
I mean, that's going to be really tough to run on, obviously, when you have the worst against the best. So that's probably my biggest concern, just from a unit versus unit perspective. But the interior of the Eagles is nowhere near the Rams, in my opinion. I mean, you have Fletcher Cox, who is, he's as good as anybody the Rams have, maybe a little less than Donald if you want to split hairs. But I mean, the Rams also have Brockers and Sue. The Eagles don't have anybody else. I mean, they're playing Nada, I think I saw Vejo, a couple times. They just don't, with Timmy Jernigan out, they just don't have another great interior presence. But, they can also put, in passing situations, they can put Bennett inside, they can, put some of the guys on the ends inside, and that makes them, really formidable on the inside. But in terms of, personnel on the interior, they're not going to see what they saw against the Rams. But, at the same time, the outside, the edges are much more dangerous than what the Rams had. You have Graham, you have Long, you have Barnett, and you have Bennett. So you have a four-headed monster out there. So this could be a lot like the Buffalo game in terms of the pressures given up, because you have four rushers who primarily are edge rushers, but they also can, play inside in passing situations. And that spells a disaster for me. If you're talking about those quicker edge type guys against guys like Compton, and Remmers. So, and Fletcher Cox primarily lines up over the right guard. So that's going to be a long day for Remmers as well. All in all, this, it's a terrible matchup. There's really nothing that they have going for them here. So it's hard to find, the positives, and I'm definitely an optimistic guy, but, it's hard to see in this one.
So looking at some of the numbers, Chris Long has 18 pressures on only 102 pass rush snaps so far this year. I mean, think about that. That's basically one of every 5 plays that he's out there. He's creating a pressure on the quarterback, and Michael Bennett's got 17 on 115, Brandon Graham 14 on 112. So these guys are getting into the backfield, and Fletcher Cox leads the entire team. He's got 5 quarterback hits. He's got 3 sacks. And, even though they don't have another guy in there that is similar to Ndamukong Suh, Fletcher Cox is just about as good as it gets. I don't have an answer either, Brandon. Is it to bootleg more often? I mean, when you watch this Philly defense, how do other teams try to protect themselves against this pass rush? Because no matter how good your offensive line is, they're going to be dangerous.
Yeah, I definitely think play action, bootlegs, misdirection, maybe incorporate some traps in the run game, to get guys, off balance and kind of throw a wrench at them. You want to hit them from different directions. try to, use deception, lots of, obviously window dressing, motions, to empty out the boxes, things like that. I mean, Dan Orlovsky had a great breakdown of Sean McVay and how they get Todd Gurley on, I think Gurley's, seen some of the fewest, loaded boxes in the NFL this year. He's ran against, I think, the third or fourth least amount of, 5-man boxes in the NFL, or the third or fourth most 5-man boxes in the NFL, somewhere in there. And a lot of what he does is he uses motions to clear out the box. So that could be something that you could do, but you have to have a running game,
right?
To, at least threaten, that and, kind of take that attention away. So, they're the worst rushing team in the NFL, so that's going to be tough. But, yeah, so I definitely think using deception, misdirection, play action, bootlegs, things like that can help, but it's going to be tough because this defense is very fundamentally sound, well coached. They fly to the ball. They have great tacklers, and just a defensive line rotation that is pretty scary. So they're always fresh. So it's going to be tough, man. I mean, but yeah, that stuff that we mentioned is, they've got to try to get creative because they're definitely not just going to go up there and just, generate movement off the ball and, hit them in the mouth, that type of thing. I don't think that's going to happen with this team. So,
well, if there's any help at all, it's that John DeFilippo was on the coaching staff last year in Philly, and maybe he's got some ideas to throw them off. But the talent gap is pretty massive there. Before I let you go, Brandon, give me your take on why everyone is throwing for 400 yards.
Lucky's 13 Pubs has you covered for the best game day experience this football season. Tons of TVs, legendary appetizers, amazing fresh half-pound burgers, handcrafted sandwiches, and a wide variety of other pub favorites. The drink menu is awesome too. Huge selection of tap beer, handcrafted cocktails, and the best Bloody Marys in town. Seriously, these Bloodies are awesome. Try the Bacon Bloody, the Jalapeno Bloody, the Mother Mary, or just get a flight and try them all. Plus, Lucky's 13 celebrates Sunday Fun Day. Happy hour all day long on Sunday, every Sunday. Events and prize giveaways during games, too. Lucky's 13 has locations in Bloomington, Burnsville, Mendota, Plymouth, and Roseville. Having people over for the game? Call ahead to Lucky's and order some of those legendary apps, and they'll be ready to bring home when you get there. It's football time at Lucky's 13 Pubs. Find them online at luckys13pub.com. luckys13pub.com. It's the most wonderful time of the year, football time. And Lucky's 13 Pubs has you covered for the best game day experience. luckys13pub.com.
Oh man. Well, I mean, the rule changes I think are huge, and I haven't really studied this out on film, but, just what the NFL is trying to do, I think this is exactly what they want. Obviously, I mean, it generates viewers and the majority of people are, just casual fans and they want to see scoring, they don't want to see the nuance, the defensive plays and, the stuff like that. So, it's what the NFL has tried to do, by changing the rules and it's, they're getting what they want. But, when safeties and linebackers are, thinking twice about crushing guys over the middle, that, it opens things up. When people can't really touch the quarterbacks, they're much more comfortable. So quarterbacks and receivers are more comfortable than probably any time in the history of the game right now. And, it's easier than ever to play quarterback in the NFL right now. I think, there was just that post on Twitter. I think it was from NFL Perspective or NFL Football Perspective or something like that. And they said that the average passer now is going to average 300 yards and a few touchdowns a game.
That's crazy.
And that's average.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So, I mean, if that's average, then, just numbers are inflated now. I mean, Drew Brees is about to become the all-time leading passer, and not to take anything away from him, and then all the other guys who are going to be breaking all these records. But it's like passing records just don't mean much anymore to me. I mean, when I see it now, it's just like whatever. I don't care. I mean, because it's so the numbers are just insane right now in terms of passing, and it's exactly what the NFL wants. So it's not really a surprise, but it is still kind of startling to see. The numbers just each week is like the most successful week in NFL's history in terms of passing production, and, yards per attempt and things like that. So it's, this is the direction it's going. So, in a lot of ways, it kind of helps to overcome, the lack of offensive line development, in terms of pass protection because, ball's getting out quicker. It's coming out, easier, protecting longer, the reps are becoming shorter, for offensive linemen. So, naturally that kind of counters the defensive line being so much better right now. So that was kind of good for some teams, but for somebody like me who really, appreciates the way this, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to sound like too much of a traditionalist, but I'm not crazy about the way the game's going. I mean, it's fun to watch and stuff in some ways, but I don't know. But this is what the majority wants. So I think that's why it's happening.
I think everything looks like my video games when I was growing up because in my video games.
It looks like the Big 12, which is terrible.
But I'm sure you did this too with Madden. Like you throw for 6,000 yards, right? And you'd throw every play and you would rack up huge totals. And in basketball, you'd shoot threes all the time. And now that's in baseball, you try to hit a home run every time, use the power button. So it feels like that's the same exact thing that's going on now. So, anyway, yeah. I'm with you on all of that stuff, especially the fact that you can't hit them anymore and you don't have to be tough to play the position. Sage Rosenfels, the former NFL quarterback, and I have talked about this a lot where before you had to be tough as a quarterback and now you just don't. And so that you could sit back there and feel pretty darn comfortable all the time. And I don't really like that I don't want anyone to get hurt, but I also don't like that this is football and one position, all the other positions have to be tough. One position doesn't. That's sort of like, I don't know. Come on. Maybe they've gone a little too far with that.
Yeah. And even receivers don't have to be as tough.
No, that's true.
Either.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. It's, it's still the football, at the highest level. So it's fun to watch, but it's changing, man, more than probably ever in my lifetime, in such a short period of time.
Well, anyway, we'll continue to look at it. And you know what, Brandon? Guess what? You're invited back to this podcast again sometime soon.
Awesome, man.
And
hopefully we have something different to talk about, something encouraging maybe over these next 4 weeks.
You know what? If things keep going this way, at least on the defensive line where I think they've still been decent, we could probably look at Stephen Weatherly's growth at some point and how Sheldon Richardson is impacting the defensive line. That's if they get the defense turned around a little bit. So we'll change.
And Daniil Hunter, for sure.
Yeah, he's been great. He's been spectacular.
Yeah, he was awesome last week.
The fact that he was able to beat Andrew Whitworth on a sack was pretty impressive in itself because Whitworth almost never gives one up. So, anyway, you should follow Brandon. You can learn a lot about offensive and defensive line play just through Twitter at Veterans Scout. Read his stuff, USA Football, or usually posted on Twitter. And we will talk to you again soon here on the Purple Podcast.
I'm Rita Foley with an AP News Minute. The White House has given the FBI clearance to interview anyone it wants to by Friday in the Brett Kavanaugh investigation. But President Trump points to Democrats saying, we don't want to go on a witch hunt, do we?
He's a good man, great student, great intellect, never had a problem. All of a sudden, let's go back to high school. They maybe should go before high school.
The president last night at a rally for Republican candidates in Tennessee. An American is among 3 scientists who have just won the Nobel Prize for their work in laser physics. The American is Arthur Ashkin.
Arthur Ashkin was born in 1922 in New York City. He made his remarkable invention at the Bell Laboratories in New Jersey, in the United States.
The Royal Swedish Academy. Ashkin shares the prize with a Canadian and a Frenchman. Tropical storm Rosa expected to drench the Southwest from Arizona to Utah. I'm Rita Foley.